Thank you. The government's talked about hospitals now getting the quantities of protective equipment that they need. Can you guarantee that all hospitals will get the same level of PPE, like the FFP3 masks? That's Professor Powers. And Mr. Sharma, the government's appealed for help from industry to produce ventilators. Is it getting the support it needs to produce PPE and tests, or do you need more help from industry? And when will the first of the 3.5 billion antibody tests be used in this country?
Great. Simon,
so again, on personal protective equipment, PPE, obviously critical to management of patients with COVID-19 and to the protection of staff. So we are putting supplies of PPE out into healthcare organisations constantly. So over 170 million of the very highest level masks in the last couple of weeks, and just in the last couple of days, 40 million gloves, 25 million face masks, 14 million aprons. So vast numbers going out. We are strengthening the supply chain every day to ensure that every organisation gets the equipment that they need. That is an absolute priority for us.
Great, thank you very much for that. Well, Ed, as I've announced today, we are making changes so that we can get more hand sanitizers into the system and make sure that we get more PPE equipment into the system. So specifically in terms of PPE, the measures that we have undertaken is that the Office for Product Safety and Standards, which actually sits in my department, has written to notified bodies on this issue. The notified bodies are the ones that are recognized as experts who test products for safety requirements. And we have asked them to prioritize the testing of any new PPE supply as a matter of priority. We want to put PPE testing to the front of the queue. Thank you. I think we have one final question from the Mail on Sunday. Brendan Carlin. Brendan.
Good afternoon. Could I ask Professor Powers, first of all, on the subject of the latest study by Imperial College suggesting that we could be, of course, a much lower number of deaths than at first feared. Does that align with the government's own thinking? Is that something modelling that you yourself agree with? And a question, if I can, for the Secretary of State. Can I ask you, you've spoken of fighting today, fighting the pandemic tooth and nail and doing everything you can. As far as many people abroad, British citizens abroad, are concerned, that looks a bit, that may ring hollow, as it looks as though we're lagging behind other countries in getting our citizens back. Aren't you concerned about that?
So it's on the modelling. I think I alluded to this in a previous answer. So of course the government is very much basing the response in this country quite rightly in my view, on the best scientific advice. And the Imperial Academic Group and a number of other academic groups are providing some of the scientific underpinning. That is managed through the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergency, SAGE, a group you might have heard of, chaired by the government's Chief Scientific Advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance. And that group will take account of a number of inputs from various academic groups, including colleagues at Imperial. But as I said earlier, and the number of deaths that arise out of this epidemic in the UK, if it's less than 20,000, as Sir Patrick Vallance said, that would be a good result, although every death, as I've said, is absolutely a tragedy. But we shouldn't be complacent about that. Although that would be a good result, it will only happen if we stop the transmission of the virus. And I sound like a broken record player on this, but it really is the way that if we're going to get to the numbers of deaths that you're talking about, it doesn't happen by luck. It's not just chance. It's because of the actions that you take, that I take, that we all take to reduce the transmission of the virus. So it is possible to get on top of this virus, but you do that by stopping the transmission. That's the basis of social distancing. That's what the government has introduced on the best scientific advice. That's what other countries have done. And we have seen in previous epidemics that it is a successful measure. So I cannot emphasize enough to everybody watching today that you have the chance to save a life. You have a chance to stop a ventilator being used that otherwise would need to be used. It really is as simple as that. This is not complex. The science behind it might be complex, but the reality is incredibly simple. Avoid contact with others where you can, stay at home. If you're symptomatic, isolate, and that will result in fewer deaths and less pressure on the NHS. It is that stark for all of us.
Brendan, just coming back to your question about whether we're being slower than other countries, I don't think that is the case. Where there have been other options for British nationals to come back to the UK, we of course have laid on repatriation flights. I made mention of the flight that arrived back from Peru yesterday, and we will continue to work round the clock to make sure that we get our people back. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think that's the final question. Can I just end by saying that we are doing absolutely everything we can to support businesses and our people, but we have to make sure that everyone follows the advice that we have put out there, and that is stay at home, protect the NHS, and save lives. Thank you.
So that's Alex Sharma, Business Secretary, and Professor Powers, Medical Director of NHS England, then presenting that press conference today. Jonathan Blake, our political correspondent, is with me. Let's look through the main headlines from what we've just been hearing.
It was interesting. There were announcements